Hey, welcome back to the Franchise Answering your great questions. Again, please keep them coming in. We love doing this. This for me is like reminiscent time. Tony Farinella, I believe it is, Farinella. Tony Farinella. Shane, I'm a big fan. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to answer my question. If you'd been able to be Shane Douglas in the WWF in 1995 without the Clique getting involved, what kind of success do you think you would have had in the company? And then he wraps up with a PS. I know you're a big fan of the band Kiss. What are your thoughts of the passing of Ace Frehley? Great question. I'm really glad somebody asked this. You may have heard me say this before. If not, just follow along. When I went to the WWF in 95, Vince and I, first of all, remember when I left in 91, Vince's words to me were, "You've been a great employee. Family comes first. Go and take care of your dad. The door's always open to come back." So I had no reason to be gloves up and protecting myself. So we had in-depth discussions. I think it took 7 trips in total, plus God knows how many phone calls and emails and things in between. There was something in the back of my brain going, "Don't do this." It wasn't overt at that time, but looking back, that was why it was all those meetings and all those emails and phone calls. I did not want to leave ECW. I would have stayed at ECW to the end of my career had it stuck around. Very proud of what we accomplished and built there. But by that time, the money was, again, without boring with the details that I've talked about for years, the money was no longer there. It was questionable if he could ever catch up with the money because it was beginning to be, he owed so much to so many people. And, for me, I was just working on starting a family and, had a mortgage and all of those things. And I was reaching that like mid-30s point where like you're either going to zip to the top of the trajectory or sort of slough off to the bottom somewhere. And, for me, it was really the perfect storm. At the time that I didn't quite fit in with the corporate WCW or WWF, there came a new company, incredibly unique, because new companies don't just sprout up. And if they do, like an indie promotion, like the ECW was in the beginning, coming from Tri-State Wrestling, you could go back into a line, draw to it where Paul was cutting out, what he considered to be the dead wood or the older talent or the talent was on its downside, and bringing in this new talent, guys nobody had ever heard of, named Conan, Rey Mysterio Jr., Juventud Guerrera, Super Crazy. I mean, just all this mind-blowing talent. At that point, 12 years in my career, I'd been near the main event status with Ricky Steamboat, but as a babyface, I had worked with just scads of future Hall of Famers and learned from them. So you could sort of encapsulate the start of the franchise character with the story about the first night I have a 5-minute promo as the franchise. This is the first show that Paul was booked in the arena after Eddie Gilbert had left. Eddie had the gimmick on me, the fabulous one. And I've always asked the fans, how do you play a fabulous one? What's a fabulous one look like? That's sort of nebulous. But the franchise, that like suddenly like a light, the sunlight, you take it all down to here like a one laser point. That sunlight will cut right through like a knife. And that was what the franchise character was for me. Suddenly all that was pulled in and I could see very crystal clear this guy in my head. A few things stories I've talked about before. Paul saying to me, he was friends with Lawrence Taylor. He knew that I knew Dan Marino and Jaromir Jagr and Mario Lemieux. And his vision was I should be wearing their jerseys to the ring every night to show that I'm such a wrestling star, I hobnob with Dan Marino or Lawrence Taylor. And when he said that to me, I looked at him and I said, heel or babyface? He said, oh, no, heel. I said, wouldn't he expect Dan Marino to wear his jersey? Wouldn't he expect Lemieux to wear his jersey? And Paul got that like mad scientist grin on his face like he gets the character. And from there it was easy. I mean, not easy physically. It was always hard in the ring in ECW. Hard but fun. Not just in the ring, but all over the building or maybe even out in the street. But for the first time in my career, I had all this experience and it was just coalesced into this I could see this guy standing in front of me. And but as time would go on, Paul would work with everybody else, and I kept asking him to give me give me some more meat to put on these bones. Let's stretch this character out a little bit. And he would never do it. I don't know if he just trusted me or didn't want to. I think it's part of conglomerate of all those things. He knew that I was going to be diligent enough about figuring out how to expand that character. And some of the others that didn't have quite as much experience in the business, especially at that level, pay-per-view level and television level, that I think he trusted me a lot more. And that, again, is one of those things that when you know your booker, your promoter, your boss trusts you, then it's a lot easier because now you'll experiment with things and sort of just gently nudge those borders out of hair. So in that sense, it was always great working as the franchise. The success, as far as going like the WWF, understand that I had pitched that idea to Vince. I had the copyrights to the name Shane Douglas, the Triple Threat, the franchise Shane Douglas, all of those things. And thank God he turned it down. And I'll explain that at the end. He had this idea for this Dean character, but how the Dean character was pitched to me initially, and then I signed, and then how that character was presented. To me, it was always A, B, C, D, and F, legit grades, a black gown, a collegiate gown with the gold trim, staying in concert with Pittsburgh. And instead it turned into this powder puff baby blue sequin exclamation point. It became a caricature. And I've often told people this is no slap, maybe it's a bit of a backhanded slap, but it's no real slap towards sports entertainment. I've never considered myself an entertainer. I've always considered myself an athlete and a professional wrestler. And so for me, suddenly seeing that, could you imagine Bruno going to the ring in sequence, right? It didn't work. And that doesn't mean that it was necessarily right, that I was correct on that or incorrect. It was just my vision because of what I had seen growing up. You have often heard me talk about Brad Armstrong and how Brad would get in front of that camera and go out and give 100%. And in the dressing room, he's beatboxing and moonwalking and telling jokes. Let that guy out. Where's that guy? So what was pitched and what it became was two different things. And then with the grades, instead of A, B, C, D, and F, which as a real teacher, I do quite well, that was the impetus to the character. Vince was noticing that even his top stars were making real simple mistakes, lazy at certain points. The only time the few times when Brett would go for a pin, not a sharpshooter. Prior to that, if you go back and watch, you'll see what I'm talking about. The only time he would grapevine the leg was when it was the actual 1, 2, 3. The false counts, no grapevine. So that was something to point out. The original layout to this was Vince promised me that they would send me the tapes a week or so before shooting. I would watch those tapes and I would pick out of that match what I would point out and then give it an A, B, C, D, or F. Then it becomes, they send to me the part they want me to comment on, so I no longer had autonomy to decide for myself. Then it was going to be TT for terrible twosome or whatever. And at the very end, as I play out how I had fun with that as I walked out the door. So I'm glad that Vince turned me down on taking the franchise. I think it would have been hugely successful because it would have preceded by about 4 or 5 years, the whole Attitude Era and the ECW-ish approach to the WWF at that time. But leaving there 6 months in, I would have been unable to use the franchise, the Triple Threat, maybe even Shane Douglas. And so like with Chyna, I didn't know Chyna well. I had met her a few times. She was always very professional and very respectful and cordial with me. I can't say a bad thing, and I'd be lying if I did. But to see her sort of ignominiously after all she had done for that promotion, and to be fair, that they had done for her too, they gave her the platform. But just because a relationship ended over here, which should be completely outside the bounds of what we do, get out of here, and you're no longer allowed to use the name that everybody knows you as. So in other words, welcome to Slumville. It's just a completely wrong thing to do. What would it have hurt them for her to use that and be able to make a living on the outside? And, understanding addiction as I do, that most likely contributed to that. Suddenly you go from making scads of money to now nobody wants to talk to you from where you worked. And by the way, you're not, so now you're Now you're trying to make that much money cover that many bills. Just a shit thing to do to somebody, I think, as a human being. So I'm glad he didn't take me up on that. And whenever I left, it was a nice, clear chopping off to me of, I've tried that route. I tried the WCW route. It seemed like my ex-wife said at one point, of all the places he's worked, it only seems that ECW has fully utilized his talent. And she was right. I think the same thing whenever I see that. So I'm glad he didn't take me up on that, and I'm glad that we were able to make the break where we did to move away from that. And honestly, at this point, I harbor no ill will to that. It was a decision that I had to make at that time. If I can't pay my mortgage, if I can't put food on my family's table, but I'm out here 28 days a month working in a semi-main event, that doesn't work for me. And it wouldn't work for you, and it wouldn't work for Vince. So the one thing I didn't think I needed was to be taught any lessons or tested in coming back in. When I left the WWF in 91 to go take care of my father, Vince's words, exact words, verbatim, "You've been a great employee. Family comes first. You go and take care of your dad. Regardless of outcome, the door will always be open." So that tells me that Vince had already seen me as paying my dues. He knew that I didn't need to be tested or whatever in going in. And in some way, and I do believe this, that to then do that to a guy that's been in the business at that point for 13 years, 14 years, have to be tested, especially when he's worked for you before. That's just like one of those things, like smack you around a little bit to see if you got the backbone or the spine. I had proven time and time and time again as being the guy that would work hurt. Why? Because that was what I was taught. That's what I would hear from Bill Watts. That's what I would hear from Dominic or Bruno. And that's what they did. So I didn't need to be tested. If I signed a contract to come to work for you, that means I'm ready to come and give you what I've got. And, just a little bit on the soapbox there, but that is so long in my past that I don't think about that anymore. I only bring it up when a question like this comes up. I will, for everything good and bad in my career, I'm a firm believer that life brings us to the point we're at, with all the good and the bad. If there's no bad, then the good, there's no good, right? It's just sort of Groundhog Day. Every day is the same. It's just going to run to the next. And I consider myself to be very blessed to have had this career this long, to have been able to do it at a time when you couldn't break through unless you were working with one of the big companies. That somehow Shane Douglas found a way to make that character relevant, to garner the respect of the fans. And I do think that if they would have allowed the franchise character to go there, and none of the other stuff happened, none of the politicking crap happened, that he would have been, and please don't take taking anything from Steve Austin, I'm a big fan of Steve's, but he would have been that kind of par of a character because he was so different from anything WWF fans had seen prior to that. And it would have, I think, ushered in a little bit quicker that Attitude Era. But in my heart, I'm thankful that it didn't. I would have been as contented as a pig in shit to be in ECW for my entire career. I don't, like, the fame stuff doesn't affect me in the least. I dress like I dress. I live like I live. But I'm also extremely appreciative for every fan that gets it, that understands, takes the time to learn it. Because it's the low-hanging fruit. Oh, he sucks. She sucks. I don't like them. To dig into it and figure out what these people are doing with the character, with the clay that they've been given. And I find so many people in our business to be incredibly talented in that level. So appreciate the question, and hopefully that gets it answered for you, Tony. Almost forgot the bottom part of that question. I'm a big fan of Tony Farinella writes, P.S. I know you're a big fan of the band Kiss. What are your thoughts on the passing of Ace Frehley? I was initially shocked, almost on par as Ozzy Osbourne. I knew Ozzy was big. I didn't think when he died that it would be like that worldwide outpouring in respect. Same thing for Ace Frehley. Ace, having walked in and walked out of Kiss back and forth several times. For any of us that grew up listening to that music, Ace really is the backbone. He's the spine of Kiss. Because if you go watch us play, my son's a guitarist, and probably could talk about this a lot more eloquently than I could. Every note Ace plays is crisp, it's clear, you hear it. and it gives the vibe to the song. Every solo he did fit like a glove. There's never a solo you hear Ace Frehley playing going, but it sounded better in Strutter. He was just so involved in that way. And to see the thing that made me feel good, when you were an active Kiss fan, a real time, 1975, 6, 7, 8, kid likes Kiss, right? Nobody liked Kiss at that time, the cool guys, supposedly. And you see how impactful Kiss has been around for 50 plus years. You don't do that just because you're wearing face paint. Gimmick, the critics hated him, which made it all the better for us that loved them, that the critics didn't love him, didn't like them, didn't respect them. But Ace was really, nothing against Tommy Thayer, great player in his own right, but he ain't Ace Frehley in the character or, in his playing. So, like, when he died, like, to me, part of that heart and soul of Kiss, I'm sure everybody has to familiar with the terms yin and yang. Everything has a good and bad. There's a black and a white side on both of everything, an up and a down, an in and an out. And, Gene being the business master that he is, in some ways I get Ace's point. Like, we need to make it about the music and not that. I don't think Gene's wrong. I don't think Ace is wrong. But, those two would butt heads. And then I saw a video of Gene at the funeral and people saying, like, the things that how emotional he was. When you've done the stuff that they've done and reached the level that they've reached, being accepted into the Kennedy Center. I see that Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons had just been nominated for the Lifetime Songwriter Award, which if you'd have told me that as a kid, I'd have thought, nah, I don't see that one coming. This band has been hugely impactful on culture, on my generation for sure, and I think a lot of newer generations with the follow-up concerts and tours. Ace Frehley, I would dare say that if not every lead guitarist in rock and roll today had some respect and some input from, like I learned it from Bruno or Dominic. If you're a guitarist, there's no doubt you're learning something from Ace Frehley. But I think the final point to that is he'll be sorely missed. It really saddens me. But none of us is getting out of here alive. Who wasn't said that? We're all going to kick off the Buffalo sooner or later. And just think for that kid from the Bronx. If you had told him as a kid, hey, you're going to be one of the biggest names in music, when you're growing up and you're going to impact all of these guitarists after you, he probably would have thought the same thing I say when you say, hey, you're going to be like wrestling in main events against, all those stars. But he did. And, lesson for everybody out there, especially younger people, if you have a dream, go for it. But be willing to bust your ass for it, because nobody's going to hand it to you free or easy. And if you start to achieve that dream, there'll be a lot of schmucks out there be happy to steal it from you. Bust your ass, go for it. If you don't succeed at it, your life is going to be advanced beyond where it is anyway. And so if you go for it and don't succeed as well as you would hope to, if you don't become the world champion, the greatest guitarist in the world, you are still going to have left an imprint somewhere. And I think that really, in the final analysis, to me, is really all we can do. Passage of time is going to come, right? 2,000 years from now, it's going to be the world in 2,000 years. Will you have left the mark on the business or on the planet? Are we leaving the planet a better place than before? Are we providing better for our kids than we had? And that when you start to get to this ripe old age of 39, this is how you start to think of the world and looking at it. So, great question. Thank you. Appreciate the question, Tony, about Ace Frehley. To his family and his daughter, my condolences. But boy, what an entertainer he was, man, and the joy he brought to me for that. So, appreciate the question, Tony, and please keep the questions coming. We love them. We'll see you next time.